This happened to me 6 years ago, when I was a freshman in college. There was a guy who ate dinner in the same lunch complex, and I, being young and hopeful, and wanting to meet new people, struck up a conversation. Bad idea. He rang almost all the bells, from being way too close and touchy, to talking about deeply personal subjects right off the bat. When I say touchy, I mean hands on my knee and shoulders, after I pushed his hands away. When I say personal, I mean he asked about my sex life and what turned me on. I got out of the conversation and resolved never to speak to this creep again. I started hanging out in other places. It was a big place, and I was happy to explore, and I thought that was the last of it. A few weeks later, I met up with some friends from the same art unit classes freshmen had the option of taking. We had plans to hang out in the graveyard on campus, because it was dark and close to Halloween, and the graveyard was historical property, so the school couldn't install any kind of lighting. Naturally, it was super dark. We ended up stumbling around, lost and totally cold. After about half an hour, we noticed who else but the creepy guy, who had tagged along uninvited when he saw us leaving the building. He had split off and totally vanished. I had been steadfastly ignoring him the entire time and was quietly thrilled, until someone noticed him several yards away, completely off the path, and wandering around the headstones. Sometimes he'd duck behind one if he noticed us looking. We tried to lose him, but he managed to catch up, and quietly invite himself in when someone suggested we watch movies in their dorm. Nobody wanted to explicitly exclude him, but holy crap was he giving off gross vibes. For some reason, we ended up crowding into someone's tiny dorm and watching Clockwork Orange. I know it's supposedly a great and wonderful movie and a work of art, but it's not something I can stomach, especially with that creep sort of standing in the corner. He wouldn't sit down. He said he preferred to stand, and sort of towered over us silently. Once the movie started getting towards the rapey bits, I said it was super late. I'd had so much fun, but I was so tired, and had class early tomorrow. Immediately, creepy guy says he's tired too. I managed to let him go ahead, tucking my jeans carefully into the tops while sharing a quiet, "what the crap," with everyone else in the room. I headed out, rounded the corner, and immediately dove into the hedges because he was pacing back and forth at the sidewalk waiting. I ducked low and stayed behind the hedges before sneaking back behind the building and taking the long way back. I never spoke to him again, and ended up transferring for unrelated reasons, but it still freaks me out to think about it. This happened when I was in my teens, around 16 or 17. I live in the UK. At this age, I lived in a pretty average area, but you only had to walk 20 minutes out, and you were in some pretty dodgy areas that were well known for their level of crime and general bad behavior. Myself and my friend of a similar age, both females, were walking to a park that was about 40 minutes away to meet the rest of our friends, all the same age and gender. To get to this park, we had to briefly dip into one of these bad areas, almost on the edge of the worst part of the estate. This was around 6 p.m., and was during the lead up to winter, and so it wasn't dark, but the streetlights were on, and it was coming into the evening. We were walking along a pathway, with my friend on the outside by the bush, which continued into an open field and space, and me on the inside by the road, just a normal two-way flowing street. We were giggling away, oblivious to almost everything a teen should be thinking about, when out of nowhere, this black car, it was like a Vauxhall Astra, sped towards us from behind. The sound alerted us as the tires screeched towards us. As the car aligned with us, we were still walking. This guy is literally hanging out of the passenger side window reaching for me. He's about a foot away from actually touching me, but as I look up to see his face, he's wearing this terrifying mask, the ones with the huge animated smiles like out of The Purge, if anyone's seen that. I will attach a similar picture for reference. Once I'd finished screaming and managed to process what was happening, I just remember grabbing my friend's arm and bolting into the field that was to the left of us. We just reached the entrance. Probably wasn't the brightest idea, but I just wanted to get away from the road. At this point, my fight or flight had kicked in. It suddenly felt a lot darker, with no lights in the open field. We stayed close to the bush where the path was on the other side, but we were crouching behind it so they couldn't see us. They never actually stopped, just slowed down passing us and reached out and sped off, but we could hear the revving and over-acceleration in the distance. We tried to calm each other down, and eventually convinced each other it was just a stupid prank and probably a bunch of young lads just trying to scare people. After around 10 minutes, we decided to carry on, heading towards our friends. You could just walk through this field. It was in fact a shortcut we decided to take, as we were clearly not any safer by the lit road. We made it to the rest of our friends safe, but 3 had already gone home, and so another 2 joined us. There was 4 altogether. The park was quite small, and there wasn't many other people around, so we all decided to go and get some cheesy chips, don't judge, from the chip shop about 5 minutes away. My friend and I were filling in our friends about the masked men and the whole event. They were super freaked out. You couldn't make this up, right? We were about 30 minutes away from where it initially happened. You can guess what happened next. We were walking in pairs, small pathway, when again me and my friend heard the screeching of tires. We shot a look backwards, and there was the black Vauxhall Astra or whatever it was, and a group of men in the car. I got a good look this time. It became clear they were men and not boys. They were well built, tall, and the driver had a beard that was protruding from under his mask. I shouted to my friends to run as fast as they could to the chippy. I just knew this was more than a prank. We were running when the car aligned with us, and 2 men, one hanging out the passenger window, the other out the back passenger window, reached out with their masks on and tried to grab those nearest to the road. All the while, the men in the car were screaming this ridiculous laugh. They were all psycho laughing at our fear. There were no bushes to hide behind this time, and we stopped, hopefully to let the car pass so we could run across the road in time and straight for the chippy. It passed. We turned to run across. It stopped and started reversing towards us at high speed. It missed us only by inches. I just remember running for my life, feeling like these men were really out to do damage, and at this point I didn't look back until we reached the chip shop. All 4 of us made it. From here, we all called our parents in hysterics, telling them what happened. All the while, this black car still sat in view, revving the engine. At this point, all of them had their masks on, just slowly tilting their heads side to side, showing off the huge grins on their masks. They were waiting for us to leave the chip shop. We explained it to the guy behind the counter, and they told us to wait for our parents. After about 5 minutes, the car sped off, and our parents arrived full of wise words and reassurance. I don't know what they were doing, whether they were out to scare us or actually hurt us. The reversing suggests the latter. I don't know why they chose us, and I also don't know if they terrified other people that night too. I just won't ever forget the masks, and the malicious laughing and chasing. Vile, vile men. Go and get some medical attention, and I don't want to meet you ever again. This happened a lot of years ago, probably close to 20 years actually, when my single father moved myself and my 2 little sisters to a not terrible but not great suburb of Denver, Colorado. The divorce shattered him, and our home. My mother had left him for another man, and the burden of raising 3 girls befell him. Skip forward a couple of months. I'm 10, my sisters are 8 and 6. We had grown fairly accustomed to the neighborhood and closely surrounding areas. My dad is working 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. in Denver, where all the best pay is, and the responsibility of my 2 little sisters became mine. I was the oldest after all. We hadn't quite melded with the other kids of the area yet, but being 3 of us, we didn't mind. We were capable of entertaining ourselves. We used to ride our bicycles everywhere, to all the surrounding neighborhoods, the hiking trails along the river that led everywhere, even along the train tracks, which could be found in numerous amounts throughout the town. One set of tracks in particular, in fact, the closest set to our home, had a long ditch-like valley along both sides of it. I think in retrospect it had been a steady type flood barrier, to prevent the river from flooding out the neighborhood across the street. Anyway, on one side of the tracks, it was a sheer drop-off, with heavy bushes and undergrowth preventing the ground from being easily accessible, and on the other side there had been a path carved out. It appeared to be by vehicles, maybe servicing the train tracks in prior years, but it was extremely steep. A bicycle was more reasonable than a vehicle in my opinion, or an ATV. They called it Dead Man's Ditch. I found out later on, but this information doesn't become relevant until later. So as I said, we used to ride our bikes around town a lot, especially in the summer months, during the day while my dad was at work, and we could travel further than he allowed. We also had a game we played, similar to Punch Buggy, combined with the license plate game. If any of us saw a license plate with double or triple characters consecutively, i.e. double B's or triple O's, we would announce it and then attempt to hit one another. It was barbaric, but we're siblings, so it's not outlandish. I don't want to share mine or my sister's names here, but on this particular day, we had been riding around for a few hours, and we were past the hottest part of the day. It was cooling down and gearing up for sunset. We made our way back toward home, and were less than a 2-minute bike ride from the house. I had been hanging back a bit, so both of my little sisters were in front of me. The youngest in front, the middle coming up her left, furthest from the street, and myself about 6 feet behind. A few minutes prior, a silver sedan had driven past us, going the opposite way we were. The car's plate had double sixes, which I called first. As we were headed up the street, I heard a vehicle accelerate impatiently behind me. This set off red flags, because where we were riding we actually affected the oncoming lane. The vehicle was headed the same way we were, in a completely unhindered lane. I turned to look, and automatically glanced first at the license plate, then at the silver sedan. Yep, Mr. Double Sixes was back. Now I could see him, Hispanic, mid-40s, wearing blue and faded farmer flannel, with no shirt underneath. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me for a second, and then sped up, veering into our lane. I watched in horror as his open driver's side window lined up with my baby sister, and he reached out and grabbed her hand and the handle of her bicycle. He slowed down a bit, trying to pull my sister off of her bike and into his open window, but something happened in his car, because all of a sudden he released my sister and put both hands back on the wheel. She took the chance and pushed on her bike, racing towards Dead Man's Ditch. My other sister and I followed suit. After a moment of what I know now was tunnel vision, I heard the acceleration of the sedan again behind me. By this time we were all hysterical, and I was trying desperately to see through tears. This guy wasn't giving up. Whatever his deal was, he didn't want to let it go. Dead Man's Ditch was approaching quickly. Thinking on my feet, I directed both of my sisters down the ditch, assuming Double Sixes wouldn't destroy his vehicle attempting to follow. My youngest sister cowered in fear at the top, whimpering about being afraid of falling. The middle sister didn't need to be told twice. She flew down the hill like it was nothing. As I caught up to them, the car right on my back tire. I said, "Just go! This guy's going to kill us!" I remember hearing her take a big breath, and then let her tire go down the hill. I held my breath until I was right behind her. All three of us made it down the hill, and the guy pulled his car right up to the opening of the path. He got out of his car and was stark naked, wearing only the aforementioned flannel overshirt, and boasting a giant hard-on which he proceeded to tug and wave in our general direction. I stood between my sisters and this creep, and after a few minutes of his exposure, I guess he decided we weren't worth the destruction of his car. He got back in his car and drove away. My sisters were both hysterical, although my 10-year-old mind had switched to business mode and the tears had ceased to flow. My only concern was getting my sisters home safely. We waited for about half an hour, and the car never came back. We braved emerging from the trail and hightailed it home. When we got home, we told my dad everything. He was outraged, understandably so, and took us in his car to drive around and try to find the man. We didn't find him, but my dad called the police once we got back home, and we filed a report. Unfortunately, with only a description of a silver 4-door car with a license plate that began in '66, and an older Hispanic man, it wasn't enough to track him down. They filled in Dead Man's Ditch a couple of months later, but not before it had saved our lives. So to the creepy naked Double Sixes guy, let's not meet again.